trying to take it easy. Take it easy, but still take it. Make it better if I break it. Sometimes that gets hard. If I slip to older ways, with poorer plans of darker days, and need a shoulder or a friend, I hope I see you then. Tell me why you won't go. I've tried to let it show. I've been to the bottom and back so many times that I simply lost track. And I think I hit my limit. This time. Well, I think I hit my limit. Think I hit my limit this time.
A good Monday morning to you, Real Talkers, at 8:30 on this February 8th. That's 8:30 Mountain Time, 10:30 Eastern. Thanks for joining us. If you're watching this live on YouTube, a good morning to you, Real Talkers. What a weekend it's been. Now, of course, it depends where you're watching us from, but if you're tuning in or if you're catching this podcast later in Western Canada, let me say on the Prairie provinces, chances are that you are experiencing the type of cold, the type of frigid cold that we only experience 1 or 2 weeks a year. If you're taking this show in from elsewhere, including the other day Andrea Ross that reached out and posted just a beautiful photo. I believe it was maybe she was walking along the seawall in Vancouver or something like that. Sam G. Brooks, the technical producer of this show, just rolling his eyes. I did the same thing.
I have it on good accord that Andrea's an avid skier, so
Yes.
I mean, she's probably missing some things about Alberta.
Well, yeah, I don't know if she's missing, with a wind chill dipping into the minus
That's
40s.
fair. I don't think anybody's missing that.
But I responded to her. She posted a photo of, it just looked like mild temps, just sort of a very walkable conditions, nobody wearing a jacket. And I said, yeah. I responded to her photo, yeah. And she said, well, if it makes you feel any better, she says, I'm listening to the Real Talk podcast. And I said, that makes everything better. So a shout out to all those Real Talkers that are catching the podcast after the fact from who knows where. We know that we have regular viewers that are tuning in from Costa Rica. I mean, other locales where they're probably hearing the surf. They probably have their annoying factors at play as well. I mean, I bet you that some of our viewers in Costa Rica are probably, dealing with issues we don't even think about, like tracking sand into the room. They probably go out to take the garbage out. They get sand on the bottom of their feet. They bring that in onto the tile or the hardwood floor.
I have to wipe my dog's paws off every time she comes in the house. I would have to be picking sand out of her fur. I don't want to do that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a nightmare. So actually, we're quite lucky to be in a situation right now that we're in.
It's a good positive spin.
We've just realized about 15 minutes ago that the building that houses the Real Talk studio it has its water off this morning. Now we don't know if that's a burst pipe or that's another. It is extreme times, ladies and gentlemen. These are extreme times, and we'll be here through it all together. We've got a great show coming up in just a moment. It's a busy Monday morning. We're going to be sort of moving at a frenetic clip to a certain degree, moving from one interview to another. And we're going to kick off with political science professor and notable Canadian. He's an expert on Canadian history and politics, and we wanted to reach out to Professor Emmett Macfarlane when we started talking about Canada's next Governor General. Of course, we don't have to tell you that Julie Payette resigned from her position amid some controversy, and now the Prime Minister, of course, will be looking to make a choice that will have the support of Canadians, a choice that he can stand by, and maybe a choice that will remove some of the questions around the previous choice he made. People saying, hey, there was sort of a long history here, whether they were allegations or otherwise, around former Governor General Payette's conduct in the workplace and how she treated her colleagues and coworkers and subordinates. And why didn't the Prime Minister pay attention to this? It's got some people asking, should we even have a Governor General? Maybe we should phase it out? Is that even possible? We'll ask Emmett that and more. A little later on today, we're going to be getting into some of your emails. We're going to be taking on some of the news headlines of the day, and including some of the things that are probably flying under the radar a little bit. And that's a big role that Real Talk can play here with regards to covering stories and providing meaningful dialogue around stories that maybe aren't necessarily leading the news headlines. Doesn't mean that they're not important stories. Doesn't mean that people don't care about them. We're going to get into our Y Station question of the week, the results. Way over, it was interesting to see, more than 1,000 of you return. We asked you for the first time to take part in a bit of a double whammy question of the week. It was the playoff bracket to see who Real Talkers wanted to name as Canada's Governor General, and we'll get into those results in just a moment. By the way, also making news right now, Bitcoin, and we're going to be talking to the CEO of Bitcoin, Adam O'Brien, a little later on this week. Bitcoin and Tesla are both just taking off right now. We'll get Adam's take on that. Bitcoin, of course, is the title sponsor of Real Talk, and they're proud to be there. They've been there since the beginning. If you're looking for someone to help you make sense of cryptocurrency, before you take the plunge, so to speak, if you're looking to buy or sell or set up a Bitcoin wallet, you've heard about these, but you don't even know what it means, the team at Bitcoin is ready to help you out. They're proudly headquartered out of Edmonton. They've got ATMs across Canada. And this year they're going public. That's a story we're keeping an eye on. You can find them under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
We'll get to Emmett Macfarlane in just a second. We asked you last week to swing on by ryanjesperson.com as depending on the week, between 1,500 and 2,000 of you do, and answer our question of the week. And this past week, our friends at Y Station, they're the official research and strategy partner of Real Talk, had some fun with a playoff bracket. And they asked you to narrow down your choices. So, for example, on the celebrity side, you had to pick right out of the gates between Ryan Gosling and Ryan Reynolds. Whereas on the more serious side, we gave you some options, with apologies to the two Ryans, some options of Canadians that could very well be considered for the role of Governor General, and we had you narrow it down. We're going to put these results in front of our leadoff guest in just a moment, but why don't we take a look here at some of our division winners. So once the bracket was pared down, this is what you told us you wanted to see develop, the storylines you wanted to see develop. So here, for example, you can see in the CBC division, Chris Hadfield did very well with 40% of the vote. Beverly McLaughlin, former Chief Justice, 32%, nipping at his heels. How about the former president of the University of Alberta, Indira Samarasekera, did relatively well, 15% of the vote. Our author, Margaret Atwood, with 13%. There in the ETalk division, Lauren Cardinal did very well. That was Sam ultimately. I think that was your vote all the way through, wasn't it?
Well, to be fair, and I will mention this, is that I didn't do the first round, so I just did the second round. So he was my vote all the way through. He was my winner, picking up from the final 8.
Okay, so from the final 8, you had Lauren Cardinal going all the way.
Correct.
If you look at where he stacked up here, vote-wise, very similar to where Chris Hadfield was at. Ryan Reynolds did all right, winning the battle of the two Ryans, if nothing else, with 24%. How about Dan Levy, Saturday Night Live host, 21%. Sandra Oh, the actor, 15%. Not bad from Grey's Anatomy. Now, when it came to who should be our next Governor General, here are the final results. Real Talkers, you had Chris Hadfield, former astronaut. You want to see Canada go back-to-back with former astronauts, from Julie Payette to Chris Hadfield, Beverly McLaughlin in second, Indira Samarasekera in third, and then you have that list. You see how that all played down when they got stacked up against one another. It's when the authors and the entertainers the movie stars start to fall off. And Chris Hadfield, Beverly McLaughlin, and Indira Samarasekera, former university president, University of Alberta, an interesting top 3. Let's see what our guest makes of this. Emmett Macfarlane is an associate professor of political science at the University of Waterloo. His research focuses on Canadian politics, constitutional law, and public policy. Emmett, it's great to have you on the show, and thanks for making time for us.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
So some interesting stuff there for you to consider. I'm going to get into some of the comments that our viewers made on the poll. Some of them said, this was fun. Some of them said, this is ridiculous. This has no bearing on what's actually going to happen. This is an insult to our intelligence. What do you make of what you saw there?
I mean, I think there's some interesting results and certainly some interesting names. I think, in my view, the best option might be someone Canadians have never heard of, someone who has kind of spent their lives doing good public service, but who hasn't necessarily captured a degree of celebrity or fame. A lot of recent governors general have been former journalists, former political operatives, or even partisans. My preference would probably be for someone who is not really seeking a limelight and hasn't sought it in the past. Although, that said, some of the names on that list are certainly people who have demonstrated good judgment in the past. And as long as we have a vetting process that matches the import of the office, I'm sure we would be fine.
Yeah, well, I wanted to get into that process with you, and I know that you'll be able to help us understand what's changed and what it looks like with the actual process of picking and choosing here. But why don't we get into what got us to this point, which ultimately is this investigation or this review of allegations that had been made against former Governor General Julie Payette, and ultimately her meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau that led to her resignation, which is the official explanation of how it all went down. Where's your head at on this? Were you surprised to see this story write itself the way that it did?
Part of me was surprised that she wasn't urged to leave the office even earlier. This is a governor general who had a series of stories over the years that did not reflect well upon the office. There were questions about her desire to even do the workload that is normally associated with the office in terms of number of events. There were questions about her willingness to do even pro forma things in a timely manner, like sign off on appointments and other documents that the Governor General usually has to sign off on. And there were questions about this toxic workplace that have really emerged more than a year ago, and is only upon this kind of report that shed more light on some of the specific details where she seemed to finally admit enough was enough and decide to resign.
Emmett, this might seem like an obvious or a question with an obvious answer, but why was it so important that she did resign? I mean, ultimately, this looks bad on the Prime Minister. Does it get to the point where it starts to reflect poorly on the Queen or on the relationship between the monarchy? And I mean, does it go that high level to a point where this could have been causing issues that the average Canadian might not even be thinking about?
Certainly it reflects poorly on the office itself. And this is really a linchpin of our constitutional system. The fact that the office is largely symbolic, that there's so much ceremonial aspect to it, is one thing. And you want someone who is kind of above any ill repute in that type of a role. But in other circumstances, the Governor General is serving as a constitutional umpire or referee in a manner not unlike the Supreme Court, except that she oversees core aspects of the constitutional conventions of our system. And that includes everything from deciding about a government that may need to be dismissed if it has lost confidence, or questions about government formation. Who should actually become the next prime minister if there is a close election and it's not really clear who ought to be able to take the reins? These are fundamental questions that you want someone who is recognized across the country and across the political aisle as having good judgment. And so having a Governor General that demonstrated poor judgment in several different ways can be very damaging to that office. And the nature of the office as unelected means that the accountability structure is kind of complicated. And it only works if both the Prime Minister is willing to draw a line in the sand when conduct becomes unacceptable. And you don't want to reach a situation where the Prime Minister is calling the Queen to appoint a new Governor General in that type of situation. So I was glad to see that the resignation finally happened when it did.
Emmett, is this an unprecedented scenario? I mean, I sort of try to think back, and my memory would be limited, admittedly, but to think of governors general that found themselves in the news, making the news, it would be quite unusual, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we've had governors general leave office early. Past governors general have died in office. Some have resigned due to health reasons, or at least left early due to health reasons. This is unprecedented. Having a sitting governor general resign in scandal is a new one for Canada, for sure.
So the process here, this vice regal appointments commission that the Liberals got rid of, how does this impact, or how do you forecast this might impact the choice moving forward? And is it good, or is it maybe not good for Canadians?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with getting rid of the advisory council on vice regal appointments was that the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau was actually actively creating new independent advisory commissions for appointments to the Supreme Court of Canada, appointments to the Senate. And yet in this one area, they actually got rid of a short-lived committee that was only created under the Harper government, and decided to go ahead and make an appointment for Governor General that really, I think the thinking was that Julie Payette aligned with their brand, that this appointment was an attractive appointment from a political and even a partisan perspective, because it fit their overall identity, and it sent that type of a message to Canadians. And it's clear that they didn't do the vetting that was required, because some of these issues relating to Julie Payette were apparent from her past, from her previous jobs. And only a minimal amount of vetting would have kind of uncovered some red flags, I think. And so it's hard to really assess how the advisory commission would have worked if it had been able to continue. But we probably would have had less of those type of branding considerations involved in the appointment, and possibly arrived at a less politically attractive, but more boring and more safe option at the end of the day.
Yeah, so sometimes boring and safe is the best choice. We're talking to Emmett Macfarlane, professor at the University of Waterloo. Emmett, check this out. We asked our Real Talkers responding to our question of the week, all said, do you believe that we need a governor general at all? Look at this. 43% said yes, it's an important part of Canadian governance. 41% said no, it's outdated and unnecessarily ceremonial. 16% said, I don't know. What do you make of the numbers? It's almost a dead split.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is, let's be honest, a lot of Canadians rightly don't spend a lot of time thinking about the Governor General, and many don't really fully understand the role and its place in our system. And I think a lot of people tie it directly to the British monarchy and the royal family, right? And so our institutional structure, I think, is a bit distinct from the question of whether this British, quote unquote, foreign royal family has much relevance for Canada. I think if you were to focus on the latter, the answer is almost certainly no. But if you focus on the role of the Governor General in our institutions, it seems to have functioned quite well. And I think that's kind of that's reflective in that split in your poll there. The idea that it kind of depends on how you look at it will really inform what you end up thinking about it.
So where do you ultimately see this going? I mean, you've made a couple of notes where you said you think maybe at this point you've referenced sort of the idea of a boring or safe or steady choice, maybe somebody that can fulfill the requirements of the office outside of the limelight, or at least having come up outside of the context of some form of Canadian celebrity. Do you have any lead on this, or do you have a direction you think that this might go? Any speculation around who might be named to this post?
Not in terms of specific names, I don't. I think they're going to want to find someone, again, who doesn't have any skeletons in their closet. So I would imagine the due diligence will be ramped up exponentially here. It wouldn't surprise me to see this prime minister select a woman for the role. But beyond that, I have no sense of any names, and I am kind of hoping it's someone that a lot of Canadians has never heard of for those reasons.
Emmett, before we let you go, generally speaking, probably the biggest story in Canada right now, at least in the context of federal politics, might be vaccine procurement, distribution to the provinces. The opposition's criticizing the government for how the process has gone. There's been some talk about Canadian companies developing manufacturing here in Canada. Critics saying we're behind the curve on that. If that was one of the initiatives we're going to pursue, we should have done it a long time ago. Generally speaking, you're a political watcher, a political commentator. What's your assessment of how the federal government's done here, and how would you assess the current relationships between the provinces and Ottawa?
I mean, on vaccine procurement, it's not necessarily an easy thing to gauge and assess, because it's hard to know how late in the game Canada got in on some of these contracts and whether that has impacted the numbers of vaccines we've been able to receive, and how much is just out of the government's control. The European Union deciding to kind of put export controls on vaccines. I don't think another government would have necessarily been able to do much about that if they were in the Liberals' shoes. So it's hard to assess. There is increasingly over this pandemic, we've seen particularly the provinces try to put a little more blame on the federal government. And there's, some worry that some of that is actually trying to deflect some of what has gone wrong at the provincial level, right? So it's very convenient for Doug Ford and Jason Kenney to go after Justin Trudeau on vaccines when they allowed the second wave to really emerge full throttle without having put any restrictions at the provincial level to try to stop them in the first place. So in the early goings of the pandemic, we saw that intergovernmental relations were almost friendly, right? There was cooperation. Doug Ford was complimenting Chrystia Freeland. And some of that has now been worn down as we realize kind of how long this is going to drag on. And it's back to a bit of a status quo of buck passing and blaming on both sides.
How are you managing your day-to-day affairs these days with regard? I mean, there's big stories in certain provinces, Ontario among them, that are reopening to a certain degree. Alberta's reopening a bunch of stuff today. This amid these new strains and some people saying they're bracing for a third wave. At a personal level, how are you making your decisions?
Well, we have a 4-year-old at home. We had decided in the fall not to let her start junior kindergarten at school. So she has been doing remote junior kindergarten on her tablet since September. We are in some ways lucky to be able to do that. We're both, my wife is also a professor. We can both work from home, but we're splitting our days. So I'm, in terms of work, I'm at half capacity because half of my day is spent with my daughter. We kind of plan for that to continue for these next few months until hopefully vaccines ramp up. And otherwise we just try to, stay at home and not engage in unnecessary activity. And we kind of wish all Ontarians would do that as much as they can.
Can we assume, we always like to ask our guests about their Zoom backgrounds. Is that the brilliance of your daughter behind you? Is that a cactus?
Good guess. It is actually a dragon, a fire-breathing dragon. Oh, and yes, that is some of her artwork.
I can see it there. Well, there you go. It's beautifully done. Emmett Macfarlane, in addition to being a proud papa, and associate professor of political science with a specialty in Canadian politics, constitutional law, and public policy at the University of Waterloo. Been looking forward to talking to you for a long time. Thanks for doing the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Taking a look at what Real Talkers are saying here on the live chat. I see, some people are nominating their own. There was a write-in option on our question of the week last week, presented by Y Station. Want to let you know that of the names that were excluded on this, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do what they teach us to do in broadcasting school. I'm going to say in a minute, we're going to tell you who the top write-in candidate was. In other words, not listed on the bracket. Yeah, hook. But right now, we want to remind you that the team at Dairy Queen has you covered at their 6 locations in Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Covered for what, you ask? Covered for Valentine's Day, which is going to be here before you know it, in less than a week. So if you would love to make the day of your loved ones, swing on by one of these 6 Dairy Queens, Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park, and pick up one of these Cupid cakes. It's a 2-person shareable blizzard cake for $16.49. That's right, less than $17, all the way up to Valentine's Day. The flavors are red velvet cake, choco cherry love, and Oreo, available, as mentioned, all the way up to February 14th. Also want to give a shout out to all of the viewers, the listeners that are tagging us in your tweets, your photos, that your Clean Air Club packages have arrived at your front door. Got another couple of them yesterday. Those of you that have signed up at cleanairclub.ca to get your furnace filters, to stay on track, to make sure that you save money and your family breathes easier. We love knowing that you're doing that for yourself, that you're cleaning up the air in your house by taking that simple step. And we love knowing that you're supporting a business that's supporting this show. So keep the tweets, keep the photos coming. And again, you can sign up there at cleanairclub.ca. So as mentioned, the new question of the week is up. This week, we're asking you about Wall Street. We're asking you about cryptocurrency. We're asking you about your confidence in the markets. You can find that question, of course, all of this prompted by the GameStop story. The question ready to be answered as of right now at ryanjesperson.com under the question of the week. But Sam, it was interesting to see. So the top write-in nominee, in other words, not listed on our bracket, but written in by the most Real Talk viewers and listeners, was Rick Hansen. I'm not surprised in the least.
I'm not, no. And I mean, that came up a lot yesterday, too. We were also talking a lot about how I think Murray Sinclair was also a very popular write-in as well.
Yeah,
right?
Murray Sinclair, Rick Hansen. It was interesting
Rick Mercer
to see.
was another really, really popular one.
Rick Mercer, yeah. I wonder if, Rick Mercer is one of those guys where he's made his career as an entertainer, very articulate, intelligent, but you can also see him, I think he would shine incredibly in that role. Like, for people that would say, well, he's a comedian, would he bring enough substance to this role? I think that Rick Mercer would be amazing. Yeah,
but like he's a comedian who spent his life following the government. Like, I mean, to make fun of the government, you have to understand the government.
Yeah.
And that's sort of been his role. I mean, it's the same way that I'd say, someone like a Stephen Colbert or a Jon Stewart is actually unbelievably well poised for that type of a role. Not that they necessarily want it, but just by nature of having to be that in the weeds on how, you understand the inner workings of government. You naturally are poised to take on something like that.
Yeah, let's get to some of the open-ended comments here. One viewer said, as things stand, we definitely need a governor general. We can't simply not appoint one and leave everything else as is. But in the longer term, I'd be supportive of exploring some options to fully detach from Queen Elizabeth. Another listener said, this was a fun exercise. Thank you for the distraction. Another says we need to end connections to our colonial past. Another viewer said, I've always taken great pride in 2 former governors general, Adrienne Clarkson and Michael Jean, both of whom arrived in Canada in the most dire of circumstances. As refugees, essentially, both shining examples of people who could contribute to their new country and have an exceptional appreciation of Canada. Another says a nonpartisan committee to vet and select for the position would be better than the Prime Minister picking somebody. I know that it's been done that way in past. Pretty interesting stuff here. A lot of people cared about it, though. I was curious to see what the response would look like here, and many people taking part in that question, which we really appreciate. A lot of support for Chris Hadfield as well on the chat. So, yeah. Make sure you get your breakfast this morning, folks, as well. Want to make sure that everybody has sustenance here. We're all looking out for you and wanting to make sure that everybody has the fuel that you need to make it through your day today. We're having a little bit, for people that are streaming us live audio on Mixlr that aren't watching this, they're going, why is...
They have no idea what's going on. Yeah.
This is a great reminder that coming up on March 5th, the team at Friesen Brothers is going to be opening the doors to their 15th Alberta location right here in South Edmonton, just off the Anthony Henday. So They've got these amazing, my wife loves it there. They've got like kind of their root cellar area, which is a really neat way to, pick out the scallions and the onions and the potatoes you need. They've got their baking section, so you can pick up whatever you need. If you're going to do fabulous baking like raisins or flour, sugar, whatever you need for that perfect cinnamon bun, or of course you can just leave the cinnamon buns to them. Friesen Brothers is Alberta grown and Alberta owned. And that store, again, opening its doors on March 5th. Want to remind you today that you can save $70, $70 off your internet, electricity, or natural gas bill if you go to parkpower.ca and sign up right now. Commercial, residential, doesn't matter. The deal fits for both if you use the promo code 2021-Real Talk. 2021-Real Talk at parkpower.ca. They've been in business proudly for coming up on 10 years in Alberta, and they make a commitment to share 10% of their profits with nonprofits in their own backyard. It's an awesome way to demonstrate they care about community at Park Power. Let's take a look at what's making news today. Well, of course, a lot of talk about vaccines right now. The federal government telling Canadians that they remain in contact all the way up to the Prime Minister's office with drug company executives. They say the target of 6 million doses of those Moderna and Pfizer vaccines by the end of March will be met. But the opposition parties say that they're not convinced. They're saying Canada's lagging way behind the UK and the US in administering shots. Vaccination centers say they're running out of doses. Federal NDP health critic Don Davies says his party wants government to release the contracts that they signed with vaccine makers, say they want to see more transparency. Meantime, when it comes to vaccines and these new strains that we talked to Dr. Lenora Saxinger about last week, if you missed that, you can find it on our podcast or anywhere. Of course, our YouTube channel is a great place to track down interviews. The AstraZeneca vaccine, it's due to arrive here in Canada soon. They're saying, listen, it's to a certain degree ineffective in preventing moderate illness from this new COVID-19 variant, the one that's been dominant in South Africa. They've detected some cases here in Canada. Now, South Africa reacted to this by suspending a planned rollout of AstraZeneca doses. It had planned to begin those vaccinations this week, but scientists are saying that AstraZeneca's vaccine may still be effective in preventing severe illness and death. Early trial results, they say, are insufficient. And, of course, these are the stories we're following. We'll keep you posted on this. And finally, on the gridiron, a shout-out to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tom Brady, 7 Super Bowls. Here in Canada, football fans are paying attention to a different story. The Edmonton football team has announced its finalists when it comes to the name that the team will carry moving forward. Of course, a name change had been long discussed, and the team taking that step in this past year. The finalists here, the names, Evergreens, Eagles, Elkhounds, Eclipse, Elk, Evergolds, or Elements. Now, Sam Brooks, the producer of this show, you've told us in past that you consider yourself to be a fan of Edmonton's football team.
Huge fan.
Huge fan.
I've been going to Commonwealth since I was 4 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the guy has a vested interest here. Did any of those 7 names jump out at you as one that inspires you?
So there's selfishly, I try to think of a multi-syllable name that you could just slide into the fight song, because like that's important to me. It's we gotta make sure that it fits there. Elkhounds came out of nowhere. And I was just like, I kind of like, because I thought elk was just a little too short and choppy, but I also I like that it's an animal that's like very native to this area of the world and would be a really good one. But but elkhounds is like, I don't know very much about elkhounds, but that one intrigues me.
Yeah, I'm not sold on any of these. Evergreens, I think I don't even know why that's on the list.
Yeah.
The Edmonton Evergreens. Although, and maybe I need to stop thinking about the tree and think more about like
red-black scenario.
They've been the green and gold forever, so they're evergreen or something like that.
You know what? Yeah. Okay, my all-time, I think, favorite sports team name that is quite literally just a color is Laval Rouge et Or, because it's in French. It just sounds so. I mean, it just means red and gold, but it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, how many? This from a football league though that had, 2 teams called the Rough Riders when they only had 8 teams, so 25% of the league was called the Rough Riders. But how many teams can you have that are named the colors of their jerseys?
Yeah, that gets to be. I mean, because the funny thing is, like, we're always going to just sort of refer to them colloquially as the green and gold, anyways, right? So it's I feel like it's a little on the nose to put the colors right there in the name of the team, but this is probably why I'm not the one naming the team.
Michelle says kind of like Eclipse or Evergold. Yuri says the Elk has the most upside for merch and revenue potential. I can see Kaylin likes Eclipse. Mercedes, the Edmonton capital X's. Yeah, that's not. You got it out of Sam. There you go. Mark says Elk is the only other name they had, oddly enough, because their name was inappropriate. Blake says Edmonton Empire didn't even make the final list. LOL. I think people were feeling that Edmonton Empire was a little colonial. Had a bit of a colonial feel to it.
It kind of feels a little bit like we took away one colonial name and we just sort of doubled down on colonialism if we went that way. So
yeah,
I think they dodged a bullet on that one.
Edmonton Esquires, Edmonton Everything, Edmonton Excellence. Alberta Stan says, what about Edmonton Energy? Now, there had been a basketball team called that. I thought, Sarah, the Edmonton Existential Crisis. The Edmonton Egalitarians, says Mike. Edmonton Energy is getting some votes here. I'm a little surprised Edmonton Energy wasn't on the list. It seems to be an obvious one.
It's an obvious shot at Calgary too. Like,
How
you know
so?
what I mean? Well, I mean, Calgary likes to, wasn't their team, their city slogan like "Feel the Energy" for a while? And,
right.
Calgary sort of like tries to pride themselves as being like the energy city, and so I feel like even though their team is the Stampeders, naming the Edmonton team the Energy would just kind of, it'd be a little jab at our friends down south, which is exactly what we need. Right?
You should troll them. Paul thinks the Edmonton the Edmonton Expos, maybe. The Edmonton Talus Domes. We're getting very regional here in our conversation. Talus Dome, of course, the big silver balls, the art installation that at least one mayoral candidate, I'm sure, will promise to remove if he wins. Chris says, please, not the Energy. Pretty please, Patrick, the Edmonton Equalizers. Okay, so everybody's split. There's not one name that jumps out here. What I would say to this list of 7, and I know that it's a tough assignment to rename a sports team, because not everybody's going to be happy, and not everyone will be happy until everyone's happy, right? Until everyone just says, okay, fine, we're moving on, here we go. Yeah. I think Edmonton Elk, I can see, I mean, this actually sounds, now that I think about it, very dangerous, but I was thinking, how, like, for example, Saskatchewan fans wear the watermelons on their heads.
Oh, yes, I see where this is going.
Right? So an elk rack,
yeah.
The marketing potential around elk racks is great, but obviously the fans behind you, the people beside you, this could be...
Well, what if they were made of foam? You just wear big foam elk racks.
Yeah.
That'd be fine.
Or do you limit people? Do you do officially sanctioned? Like, I don't think they do in Saskatchewan officially sanctioned watermelon helmets. I think everyone brings their own.
You have to buy your watermelons from this bin at the grocery store,
right?
because these are the official riders' watermelons.
Yeah, so people are going to want to bring in their own elk racks, and I'm getting all kinds of crazy ideas. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we'll see. So they say that's the list of 7. All right, let's get to some serious business. Now, you heard us checking in with communities across the province of Alberta a while ago as the province was getting set to make changes that it had said it was going to make to 911 dispatch across Alberta. And mayors were speaking out on this show. Fire chiefs were speaking out on this show and sort of warning us. They were warning the provincial government, and they were warning us of what might happen. Well, the changes have been made, and the voices are growing even stronger. So for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to check in with people who are being affected by this. We're going to get firsthand reports on what the early transition has looked like with regards to emergency service delivery And we're going to get a sense of what these community impactors want you to do when it comes to having a voice and catching the attention of your elected officials. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program His Worship, Don Scott, the mayor of Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo, and along with him, Captain Julie Stewart, who for more than a decade has served with the Anzac Volunteer Fire Department. Julie, Don, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here this morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Ryan.
Mayor,
thanks for having us back on.
Yeah, you bet. Happy to have you here. Last time, and Julie, we're going to talk to you in a second to get a sense of what this means in the fire halls, what this means with regards to emergency response. Mayor, you were here, I guess, less than a month ago saying this is worthy of sounding the alarm. I don't want to be too dramatic here, but have your worst fears manifested themselves? Where are we at now that the changes have been made?
Yeah, it's actually far worse than we anticipated, because what we've been doing since the transition happened on the 19th. Just to remind your listeners, what happened is there's a shift in the way EMS calls are dispatched. So instead of local people doing it in my region and in other parts of Alberta, they've all been transitioned to certain call centers throughout Alberta. And what we said is, my region's as big as Nova Scotia. That's going to cause a lot of problems. 4 previous governments refused to make that transition, and I was part of one of them, so I was there firsthand to see it. And what's happened is the transition has nevertheless been implemented by the UCP, and all the things that we predicted would happen are exactly occurring. You know, it's what I've been calling is a giant calamity. It's probably worse than a calamity. We've been watching the calls, we've been shadowing them, and we've had to intervene in about 20%. And the situation that Julie was involved in is emblematic of everything that we predicted would happen and what I foresee happening as we go forward.
Captain Stewart, what's he talking about?
So as he mentioned, AHS took over centralized dispatching on January 19th. The day after the takeover occurred, we had an incident in our small community where a tree had rolled on an elderly man who was a pillar of our community. Another resident was with him, to which he contacted a member of the local fire department, asking him if we were en route to help this man who was in his backyard in the elements of -27 with a tree that had just rolled, and he had sustained injuries to his lower leg. We had not been dispatched to go. So we self-dispatched ourselves knowing that this man needed our help. And we made ourselves available, provided patient care, prevention for hyperthermia, stabilized his leg. We waited for the ambulance. We then ended up having to send 2 members out in the community to find the ambulance itself, as they were not given the proper coordinates of where the injury occurred. And then our members had to guide the ambulance to this 76-year-old man that was laying in his backyard with a double fracture to his lower leg.
So had somebody not followed up, had you not self-dispatched, who knows how long this guy would have been laying there? Who knows what the consequences would have been? I would imagine that a spokesperson might say, yes, early issues, crossed wires won't happen again. Have you seen other examples here? Was this a one-off, or is this indicative of a bigger problem?
Right. So certainly we were all kind of a little, okay, here we go. We're no longer under our local dispatching. So it was, the day after. So we thought likely hiccups, maybe a few clunks along the way. But sadly, it wasn't just that one call. We had another very serious incident occur on January 29th, where a youth in our community was involved in a snowmobile accident. And he was left outside in the cold for over an hour before an ambulance came out from Fort McMurray. To add to that, the ambulance came out cold, which in our terms would mean no lights or sirens. So they obviously did not know how to prioritize this call and the severity of the injuries that the individual had sustained. And once that ambulance made patient care contact, obviously wondering where their local fire department was in the community of Anzac, 50 kilometers away from Fort McMurray, they had to dispatch another ambulance from Fort McMurray, ALS, Advanced Life Support, to provide patient care. So the delay was astronomical, and He was airlifted to Edmonton. You know, it's close to home for me. He is the family friend. And so it's just very sad. I just don't want to see this happen to anybody else in my community. I don't want this to happen to anybody else within the region of Fort McMurray.
So, Mayor, you've sent another open letter to the province. It's co-signed with the mayors that you were here on the show with previously, Mayor Nenshi down in Calgary, Mayor Spearman, who we're going to talk to in a minute, out of Lethbridge, and Mayor Veer out of Red Deer. Do you think that anecdotal evidence like fire captain's telling us about is enough to catch the attention of the province? Do you get a sense that you have a captive or open-minded audience with the government? Where is this at right now?
Surprisingly, we have not been met with an open mind at all. They are very closed-minded, very determined to impose this no matter the human cost, because we have been talking about this for 6 months. We've been predicting this. Right after the transition, they said the transition is very smooth. Everything went great with no incidents. And these events that we're describing, and these are not the only ones, just to be clear, we've had to intervene in about 20% of the calls. There's lots of other examples, but these are two that are pretty dramatic. The government has refused to make any changes. The government is in fact going the opposite direction, saying how great it is. And what they've been doing instead is saying that the people who are talking about these problems are lying. That's effectively the letter and the comments that we've been receiving from the government. So it's very disappointing. It's a very disappointing path for this government to take, and I think the residents of this region have a lot to be upset about.
Yeah, I'm going to say, just editorial, it takes guts to pick a fight with teachers, doctors, nurses, paramedics, and firefighters all at the same time, most especially during a pandemic. Captain, you've given us a sense of the geographical implications. If you have to call for another ambulance, for example, out of Wood Buffalo to get to Anzac, I don't care how fast you're going, 50 kilometers is still 50 kilometers. Is this, we can talk about the issue in the city of Lethbridge or in the city of Fort McMurray, in the city of Calgary, but for these rural communities like Anzac, is this even more of an issue for your neighbors?
100%. I have to go to the local grocery store and the gas station, in addition to our fire chief and deputy and other Anzac members that have been on the fire department for years. And people have got questions. People don't understand what's going on. So we don't move, we don't get hurt, but people still have to go on. They have to go to town. They have to get essential supplies. We're still navigating through this global pandemic. And here we are now unsure that if our kids are out, using the recreational tools that we have and we choose to live rural, whether they're going to have medical support coming their way. So not even just that, it's somebody with a predetermined medical condition, somebody who has a stroke or a heart attack. They never conducted any type of community engagement or risk assessment with us to even understand the layout from Fort McMurray to Anzac, Fort McMurray to Janvier, Fort McMurray to Fort Mackay. Like, we are super rural communities to, these ambulances coming to our aid with the wrong information.
To give us a sense of how dispatch worked before, Julie, were these operators people that lived in these communities? I mean, these people like you just described, these secondary highways, were they traveling these secondary highways on their way to work at the dispatch center? Is that how local these professionals were in past?
Yeah, exactly. So our local dispatching, they knew the geographic layout of our region. So they knew when they're sending an ambulance, they're not asking questions of like, what intersection are we meeting you at? We don't have intersections. We don't have traffic lights. We are super rural community. So they understand when they're sending out an ambulance, they're sending a mile marker. They know that information, and these centralized dispatched employees don't have that.
So, Mayor, what do you want Albertans to do right now?
Contact your MLAs. We have been making that effort. Mayor Nenshi, Mayor Spearman, Mayor Veer, and I. Contact your MLAs. Let them know that this is unacceptable, and every Albertan should be demanding top health care, especially during a pandemic, as you said. And this is one of those times when every Albertan should be extremely upset with what's happening. We predicted this. It's exactly occurring as we described. 90% of the time, our ambulances were being dispatched faster than AHS before the transition. And we told them that. We showed them the information. They are not being transparent with Albertans. They're not being accountable to Albertans. And they're certainly not being accountable to the people of my region. And the people of my region should be rising up and being extremely upset. We're going to be having a council meeting on Tuesday. This is going to be front and center in that meeting. And we'll be taking action as a council. But I believe that every resident of this region needs to rise up and complain to their local MLAs and to the UCP government, to the Minister of Health, and to the Premier. The Minister of Health he's had his head straight in the sand this whole time as we've been going forward. And the Premier hasn't answered the letters that we've sent to him asking for this to be stopped. And that really is the answer to this. This should be stopped based on what we've observed to date and what we predicted would happen.
Captain Stewart, before I thank you for your time, let you get back to your duties at the fire hall. Is there anything you wanted to add to what Mayor Scott had to say there?
No, it would just be, it'd be nice to hear from them.
Yeah.
There have been statements made that are inaccurate. So it's just be accountable and follow the values that you post on your website. So compassion, respect. So these are things that they're not following. And it would be nice to hear from them. We've sent a letter, like myself, on behalf of my department, and as a community member, not heard anything back. So still, keep our voices loud. And like Don Scott just mentioned, make sure that you keep reaching out and writing those letters and keeping our voices nice and loud so they can hear us. This is not okay, and we can't keep going this way. I don't want to be in a position where I have to report to a fatality or hear of a fatality that we weren't even able there to support our community.
Well, that's gonna be the thing. I mean, not to state the obvious, but we know that first responders, it's not a job, it's a calling. And I can imagine how somebody would feel, that shows up 6 or 7 minutes late to a call and they've just lost the patient 60 seconds ago as civilians are doing CPR. I mean, I can just picture it. It gets me thinking about a completely different story. Edmonton building an LRT in between, that runs across the entrance to the emergency room at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. You just sit there and there's been ambulances waiting while anyway, don't get me started. Time is of the essence. 10 seconds or 1 minute matters. We know that. Captain Julie Stewart with Anzacs Fire Department, thank you for your service. Thanks for making time for us today. And Mayor Don Scott out of the RM of Wood Buffalo, Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo. Thank you for that to you both.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, you bet. We're going to head down to Lethbridge in just a second. Don't ever, sometimes when you're in the middle of chaos and things sort of start to lose their, maybe not their meaning, but they lose their significance a little bit. May it never lose its significance that the mayor of a city is saying publicly that the health minister has his head in the sand and has the whole time. Let it never become normal that the Alberta government is fighting with almost everybody across industries, across communities, across the rural-urban divide, across budget line items, education, health, industry, refusing the common thread we're hearing on this show and in any interview that you watch or listen to, you will hear people saying they are not taking our advice, they are not consulting, they are not answering us back, they are not listening. Let that never become normal. The team at Local Waste has been in business. Speaking of communities, it's what they're all about. For more than 25 years, they've been fighting for your business. They love to talk trash. They want to take your call. Whether you're a small business or a big operator, hotels, grocery stores, shopping malls, they want to come up with a solution that allows you to increase the level of service that you receive and decrease the bills that you're paying. It's what they're all about, going up against the big faceless garbage guys, and they want to talk trash with you today. You can give them a call, Chris or Lauren, at 780-242-9746, or check them out online at localwaste.ca. Also, a shout out to the team at Westworld Computers today. You may be looking to upgrade your Apple Watch, your iPhone, your tablet. Maybe you want to pick up a new iPad or a MacBook Pro, but it's not in the budget to go brand new. Well, they've got their refurbished, and of course, they tack a little extra warranty onto that. The previously owned products that they're proud to make available to Westworld customers. They've been building these customer relationships as a family-owned business for more than 40 years. So if you're looking to upgrade on a limited budget, they can work with you. Go see Daryl and his team at Westworld Computers. Now, I promise, Real Talkers, I'm going to get to some of your comments on this, but we're operating with limited time here, and we appreciate the availability of our next guests. So let's head down to Lethbridge, Alberta. That's where we find Mayor Chris Spearman and Fire Chief Mark Rathwell. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show. It feels like it's been a while since we last spoke, considering everything that's developed. Mayor Spearman, I'm sure that you heard what Mayor Scott had to say there. Do you share his sense of urgency? Are you stopping yourself, or maybe not even stopping yourself from saying, "We told you so"?
Well, we never like to say we told you so. I'd like to commend my fire chief for being a professional and trying to work with the folks at Alberta Health Services. We have not been treated with respect. There has been no accountability. There's been no meaningful effort on behalf of the leadership. I'm talking here about the chief paramedic, Sandbeck, and Dr. Bernie Yu from Alberta Health Services, right up to the minister. They really have indicated no willingness to work with us on these issues. So we've identified a whole series of things, and I'm going to say it because I'm the politician, and our chief has to work with Alberta Health Services. He's trying to resolve these things, but since the implementation of centralized dispatch, we've seen increased response times, wrong addresses. Sometimes similar addresses in the city are confused, so we're in the wrong geographic quadrant. ALS support engines sometimes are not even being dispatched or not being dispatched efficiently. So, we're seeing a lot of risky situations, lower levels of service, and we believe that lives are in jeopardy. So I think Chief Paramedic Sandbeck, when we complained and when we had our joint message a couple of weeks ago, his response was, "These mayors are lying. We know this isn't true. This is our system." And I beg to differ. He says that he's got access to data from the system. Well, Albertans pay for that system. It's not his system. That system is there to safeguard all Albertans. When we report deficiencies with the current levels of service, we should get a response. Our chief is being very polite and very diplomatic. We're not getting a response. When we identify issues, there is no response. So I am agreeing with Mayor Scott. There's no accountability. With something as important as ambulance response, shouldn't there be measures of effectiveness? Shouldn't the public know when the system fails and what the efforts are, what's being put in place to fix that? Because right now, none of that exists.
Chief Rathwell, there's been some time that's passed now, I suppose, for you to get a sense of what the new reality looks like. I can already imagine that spokespersons that would advocate for or explain or justify the change would say, "Hey, listen, there have been some bumps in the road. There have been some hiccups." What have those looked like from your end? What have they looked like for the firefighters down in Lethbridge?
So we actually look at this several different ways. Yes, there's been problems and issues, and those issues translate to risk. And risk in my community is a tough thing to swallow when we're actually taking a step backwards, it feels like, in the service delivery model that we've been providing to our community and to the citizens around us. So we have seen lots of wrong addresses. Yes, we've seen lots of delayed responses. We've seen our integrated model not used in the most efficient way it can be. And when I say that, it's our medical first response group, and I can echo this for all the communities that have this. That is the Band-Aid holding a lot of folks together. So when the ambulances are busy and unavailable or delayed because they're coming from 20 minutes plus away, it's that medical first responder, no matter what community we're in, that's responding, that knows their job and can go out and help stabilize those situations. And when you're not using that efficiently or effectively, that's a delay, that's a risk, that's a concern for myself, for my community, and certainly you've heard it echoed from all the mayors as well.
Mayor Spearman, are there other implications here with regards to not just response times or not just service to civilians, confusion around calls, wrong directions, unfamiliarity with territory? Is there a revenue implication here for these cities, including Lethbridge, when you lose the ability to contract out these services? Have these Alberta cities lost revenue?
We haven't lost revenue. In fact, we were prepared to pay for the service to maintain the higher level of service, but our offers fell on deaf ears. So we believe there'll be added costs in the future as we'll be forced to separate the ambulance service and the fire service going forward, because we haven't been receiving additional ambulance services as our city has grown. So we're building a new fire hall in West Lethbridge, and there's been no commitment to provide an ambulance there. So we'll have to move an existing ambulance to that fire hall in an effort to serve almost half the population of the city of Lethbridge.
So where does this go from here? Like if you're sounding the alarm, so to speak, and not getting any response, and you feel like nobody's listening. I mean, Chief, let me ask you this first. Like, how do you? I mean, here you are doing interviews, but how do you ramp this up, and ultimately, how do you get the change made that could be a matter of life and death, the change that needs to be made?
So I guess what's been great is both our mayor has done a great job leading us through this. He's going to take that political route and manage that part of it. I'm going to take the operations side of the business, and that's the part I'm going to dig into, and I have been digging into. My whole staff has been digging into. We're watching the patterns that are emerging, which we knew were going to happen, and we're seeing some that surprisingly caught us off guard a little bit. And we're monitoring all those. We're reporting those through the correct procedures that we're supposed to use. And we're trying to come up with some solutions out of the box to try to help make this sort of new norm. I hate using that term, by the way. It seems to be a 2020 catchphrase, but we want to take those learnings and some of these out-of-box ideas and share them with our counterparts to see if this is a solution that we could maybe make this better overall, because I believe we have to work together. We don't have a choice. But I do believe that there's opportunity in here where we can try to influence and hopefully share our efficiencies and some of our ideas to try to make the system overall better.
And Mayor, you've announced already that you're not going to be seeking re-election. I don't know if that impacts how you treat this or not. Some might say you can leave it all out there on the field, although I might suggest that if you were seeking re-election, you'd probably treat it the exact same way, considering the implications here for the people of your community. So how are you? What direction are you going to take this in?
Well, I'm the mayor until the third week in October. And I'm going to continue serving as the mayor, and I'm going to be advocating for my community. Our chief is being a professional. He's trying to work through the existing processes. All the information that's being communicated is being communicated in one direction. That's from the city to Alberta Health Services. And we're just not getting the response back. There's no indication that they're prepared to improve the system. They're just prepared to impose it. And I find that disappointing, and I think that's a really poor attitude. I think there needs to be a commitment from the Alberta government that they're going to provide the highest level of service. And to this point, there's been no assurance, no credible assurance that they're willing to do that.
Mayor, Crazy James on our text line is wondering if the AUMA would have any role to play here. Is this on Mayor Morishita's radar? Is the AUMA talking about this? Can you help us non-politicos understand how that would work?
Well, yes, we've communicated both with the AUMA and the RMA, which is the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, and both are supporting us. They are both saying that we have a valid case, we provide the highest level of service, and the government should be listening to us. But the AUMA and the RMA have similar issues in different areas where the government is not prepared to listen to us. And as I said the last time, here we have a government made up primarily of people who were not in government prior to 2 years ago. So I think Rick McIver and a few others are the few experienced MLAs for a bunch of rookies. And they're just telling people they're going to do it their way. And I think it's from one issue to another, it's been a total disaster.
That's Mayor Chris Spearman out of the city of Lethbridge. That's also where Fire Chief Mark Rathwell is joining us from. Gentlemen, don't envy the position you're in. Obviously, this is something that impacts all Albertans, but we appreciate your candor and your continued service to your communities. Thanks for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah, you as well. The Real Talkers on our live chat right now, Sandra says, she's wondering about the community of Fort McMurray, wondering why they voted UCP, says, wasn't Brian Jean their representative in past? Yeah, I mean, did you read that? We didn't really talk about it much. I should say Brian Jean had an editorial published late last week, kind of an open letter to Jason Kenney on leadership, and it took a few swerves. It took a couple of interesting directional changes, let's say. We can get into that today. I'll let you know that we did request an interview with Mr. Jean, who simply said to us, he said, thank you for the opportunity. He said, congratulations on the show. He said, I think I'm just going to let my editorial speak for itself. And it did. We'll get into that maybe a little bit later on in this show, or at least sometime this week. But obviously there's been strong support for conservative governments in those communities, not to say always. Wigwith says, it feels like the premier's attacking everybody all at once, so it's hard to keep up with all the things he's doing. It makes it hard for average people to really know what's happening. And you're right, Wigwith. We'll get the odd letter from somebody. We received a few just last week to talk@ryanjesperson.com. That's how you can send us an email. People are writing. They're kind of channeling their, if you're a hockey fan, you know Elliot Friedman and his 31 thoughts. Someone wrote in 30 reasons why they're upset with the provincial government. And I was reading through the list going, yep. You kind of forget, right? If it's one thing that plagues a government, or one or two things, that's one scenario. If it's controversy after controversy, scandal after scandal, fight after fight, it's a bit of a different game, isn't it? Ken says rural support dropping. Q Premier making up a rural-urban divide on the coal mine issue, which he did last week. You probably saw it. I don't have the quote in front of me. Premier Jason Kenney said something along the lines of, people in the big cities need to remember that everybody needs jobs, or something like that. Sort of tried to turn it into an urban-rural kind of a thing. Mark says, there are too many things to contact your MLA about. It's the Trump approach, overwhelm people, so they can't just focus on one thing. We're going to prove that to you in the 10 o'clock hour. We have another interview coming up, another GoFundMe, another petition, another fight, this one on harm reduction. And lawyer Avnish Nanda and Dr. Jennifer Jackson, a PhD and a registered nurse out of the University of Calgary, will join us. That's coming up just after 10 o'clock to tell us what they're so upset about. Lynn says the government simply doesn't engage in consultation with its voters. Lynn says, sadly, I suspect the rural populations will continue to support them. Good luck. I don't believe they'll listen. I don't know about that, Lynn. I'll be curious to see. Now, people will say, and this is not, we have another guest set to go here, so I'm not going to wax too long here, but people will say, I'm upset with this government, but I don't see an option that compels me. And this is kind of classic, especially in a two-party system. I hear it from people all the time. We get letters to the show that say, I'm furious with the UCP. I'm not happy with them, but I don't know about the NDP. I'm just not sure. And then you've got these other parties going, well, what about us? Like I saw, I don't have it in front of me, but I saw somebody wrote in a note to say, hey, the Alberta Party's been talking about this for a long time. And the Alberta Party announcing, by the way, a few days ago what its leadership race is going to look like, the timelines for it. Kind of weird timelines, by the way. They're kind of running head-to-head with election cycles, and anyway, I'm not going to get into that now. But they will argue and they will bang their drum saying to you, there are more than two options. I just hope that when people consider, political engagement or political support, volunteering, donations, wherever, that they're actually able to evaluate the performance of elected officials, and they're able to evaluate policies and what would be best for their communities. And sometimes you have to look outside the party banner, or you have to look outside, the past connotations of certain parties. My grandpa or my grandma always voted this way. I've always voted this way. Sometimes you got to be able to say present day, or even looking ahead, right? What's going to be best for our community? What party has the best platform, or what leader demonstrates and exemplifies the qualities that I seek in a party leader or in a political leader? Who inspires me? Who do I trust? Who do I believe? These are all questions we want to make sure that we're asking. Before we move on to our next guest, I wanted to remind you that this is the type of year where people are looking around and realizing the value of a reliable vehicle. If you kind of hold your breath, or if your heart's in your throat every time you try to start your car, your SUV, your truck this time of year, maybe it's time for an upgrade. And if that's the case, I want to encourage you to go see the teams at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. Of course, we've been telling you they are the destination in Alberta for the Jeep brand. But of course, they've also got one of the largest inventories of Ram trucks in the province. And right now they're offering 0% financing up to 96 months or discounts up to $17,500. That's right, almost $18,000. You can check out their websites for all the details, and they're easy to find. You just go check out the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com, and that'll lead you to the links for Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge. Well, this next conversation, I mean, these are the types of conversations that we tell you that we're open to all the time. And the show, when we say something, we mean it. And so that's why I'm excited to welcome our next guest. She was tweeting over the weekend. I listened to the roundtable for Friday's Real Talk, and I want to say something about having a panel that talks about Aaron O'Toole as a possible prime minister in 2021. That was Harman Kandola that made that pick. And then celebrates listing the Proud Boys as a terrorist group. Well, of course, the tweet caught my attention, and so it's a real pleasure to get into it, to welcome to the program an assistant professor out of the Department of Humanities at York University. She's the editor of the culture and politics website, Puri Science, Dr. Shama Rangwala. Thank you so much for being with us today, and welcome to Real Talk.
Hi, Ryan. It's great to talk to you. It's great to see you virtually.
Yeah, it looks like we might have you frozen. Sam's going to work on it. Oh, there we go. You're right back. Did I,
okay.
Doctor, did I pronounce your name correctly in the introduction? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, it's Shama Rangwala.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Well, welcome to Real Talk. We say, like, when it comes to what's Real Talk all about, we want to have meaningful conversations, and oftentimes those conversations become most meaningful when people have time to take them in and think about them and then offer commentary. In other words, we sometimes have to have conversations over series of days. And so I'd rather have you do this in your own words than me continue to read your Twitter thread. What was it that prompted you to reach out and comment about what you heard on our roundtable on Friday?
Well, first of all, it's not worth, commenting on every kind of media thing. So I knew that you would be receptive to it. And I'm just always asking people to think historically and systemically. So when we have something like the terrorism designation, if we just think about it as, these are white supremacists, we need to expel them from our body politic or from, the public sphere, we're not actually thinking about what that term terrorism means, how it's been used historically. So I'm old enough to remember the expansion of the surveillance state after 9/11. And the person I really want to direct Real Talk listeners and viewers to is Harsha Walia, because she has been tweeting about this. She has been speaking out publicly about this terrorism designation and just came out with a book called Border and Rule. I'm in the middle of reading it. It's really brilliant. Not everyone has time to read books, but yeah, follow her on Twitter, Harsha Walia. But okay, what is terrorism? Terrorism is not just our people being scared, right? It's not that emotion of terror. It's a very ideological, political concept. And it has been used to expand militarism abroad. So, U.S. interventions in Afghanistan, Canada was there as well, and to expand police surveillance domestically. And so this is not good for the kinds of people who, you might think are being protected by designating the Proud Boys as terrorists. It's actually kind of the opposite of what Black, Indigenous, and people of color have been calling for, which is the defunding, dismantling, abolition of police and that surveillance state.
So when you talk about the Aaron O'Toole conversation that we had on Friday and what it might look like for Canada's official opposition to attempt to glean the support that it would need to challenge to take back Canada. That's been the marketing, or take back the government next federal election. What is it? I don't want to assume anything, and I don't want to assume that something is understood by myself or our audience. So I guess I'm asking you to spell out what you believe to be most problematic about that type of political messaging.
Yeah, Take Back Canada is part of these revanchist movements all across the world. So what do I mean by revanchist? So revanchism really typically is about regaining some kind of thing that has been lost. So it can be lost territory, or it can be a lost feeling of, you know, what the nation is. And so saying Take Back Canada, who are they taking it back from? Are they taking it back from, you know, women, people of color, other kinds of people who were historically excluded from, you know, the political public sphere? This is a global phenomenon. And so, you know, it's manifesting in Canada in its particular flavor. But Take Back Canada is not different in terms of quality as like Make America Great Again, because they're all about, let's go back to some other time. We know that the UCP is doing this as well. They want to go back to some previous time when there was an oil boom. I mean, we're definitely not going there anymore. So I just want people to think about the right-wing ecosystem, because if we're looking at politics as a horse race where like, oh, are they jockeying for position, or what do the polls look like, or can they criticize the other party enough so, you know, they can gain some ground, that actually misses the whole kind of ecosystem they're a part of. And when I say that, you know, the Proud Boys are in a continuum with like Rebel Media and Post-Millennial, Ontario Proud, Canada Proud, and the CPC, that's because they had, you know, Hamish Marshall and Jeff Ballingall as their, you know, working on their campaigns. And so this is not a kind of abstract connection. We know that those forms of media have been apologists for the Proud Boys. I know that Real Talk listeners and viewers are very good at finding receipts and investigating. It's part of my Twitter thread as well. I retweeted someone who did kind of dig in there. And so when you have, you know, Andrew Scheer go on Faith Goldie's show, Carrie Diod, you know, Edmonton politician, picture with Faith Goldie. I mean, she is an actual white supremacist. So these are not kind of abstract connections, but we need to think about how they work in tandem. There are things that politicians can't say. And so when you designate the Proud Boys as a terrorist group, it allows them, it's like a gift for them, because they can say, oh, I can denounce that. And so you know that that's not part of us. But I have this, you know, I'm a kind of nerd, like I teach film and stuff. So I'm going to use a Godfather example. So in Godfather Part 1, there is this famous scene where the baptism happens, and, you know, Michael Corleone is out there, you know, he's in the church. He's like saying, I denounce like Satan, I denounce all this stuff. And of course, it's intercut with scenes of all of the murders that he, that, you know, he has ordered. So there's always a kind of sanitized image on the one hand, and then they're part of this whole ecosystem. This is very old. You know, in India, there's the RSS and the BJP. You know, there are all kinds of ways that organizations work together. But this is not to say that the CPC is, you know, saying the same things. But when we only focus on the spectacular and very explicit forms of white supremacy, we're not putting them in connection with the ways that they're sanitized and then repackaged for the public.
But Dr. Rangwala, you know how this is going to go, right? You know what, if we had Aaron O'Toole on the show today, and by the way, we have been talking to his team, and we've been trying to book an appearance for Mr. O'Toole to join us here on Real Talk, or if you were talking to Andrew Scheer's team prior to that, or if you were talking to Premier Kenny's team right now, or Premier Moe's team, or any of the, you know, Premier Ford's team, all of the prominent conservative politicians in Canada right now, let alone the MPs and MLAs and everybody else, they would say, listen, we're a big tent party. They would say, obviously, we don't condone racist or offensive views. Obviously, that has no place in this party. You know, they'd come up with some sort of excuse like politicians do across party lines, saying, I don't speak on behalf, or, you know, I don't even know who these people are. You know, Jason Kenney, you know, pretended like he was surprised that you know, certain people had memberships to the United Conservative Party. I don't even know who these people are. We're a big tent. What would you say to them? What would leadership look like? What would your response be to a hypothetical statement like the one I just put out there?
Well, I think that it's very convenient to denounce racism. I think it's very convenient to say that these are not people who are part of the party when they have built they've built a tent where people who, believe in, say, white genocide conspiracy theories feel welcome in that party, right? And so, I think that this is a strategy, though. This is the way that Canadian kind of multiculturalism works. Of course, there are people of color in the Conservative Party. There are people of color in the Proud Boys as well. There are all kinds of ways that these organizations legitimize themselves. But why are white supremacists attracted to conservative parties? Why does white supremacist media like The Rebel support conservative parties?
Why do you think?
I mean, I think that this is, they're the dog whistles who want to, I actually have a longer answer to this because I have given.
We have time. Because I want to get. No, Shama. Like I'm thrilled that you're here, and we've got lots of time. We got lots of time. So, because here's my thing. Like, I'm going to generalize, but what I would say to you, if you're out for a coffee together, here's the deal. Like, conservative parties know that they need to grow. They know that they need to. They did all right in vote count in October of 2019, but they lost the election. It's because they dominate the prairies. They run up the score in Alberta and Saskatchewan and parts of Manitoba and eastern British Columbia, but they take losses in the GTA and in Greater Vancouver and in Montreal, and that's where you need to win, or generally you need to win in Quebec. And so these parties know, here is the great debate that they have, I think, which is, do you try to go a little bit more mainstream? I mean, it was fascinating to watch Aaron O'Toole even campaign for the leadership of the party, because he kind of had to pander to the membership base to win the leadership, right? So talking about things like firearm rights and hard on the carbon tax and these types of things. But then you kind of have to back off and appear to be a little bit more moderate, because then you have to win not just with party members, but with Canadians, right? So you look at what a party would have to do, a conservative party or any party, to win in the urban centers. You've got to be more moderate. You've got to be more progressive. You've got to be more present day, if I can say. And that's where they believe that they're going to lose their base. So there's pandering. It's like, you're standing on these two icebergs that are separating, and you're kind of slowly going into the splits, and you've got to make a decision. Are we going to double down? And here's what I don't understand, quite frankly, with some conservative politicians, and we could do a whole other talk on liberal or NDP politicians or Green politicians, but we're talking conservatives right now. What I don't understand is they seem to work so hard to fight for the support they already have, and they don't seem to understand how to glean the support of voters that they don't currently have, and or understand in meaningful fashion why they don't have the support of those voters.
Yeah, so let's talk about, I like this iceberg because we talk a lot about polarization. We are living in a time of crisis, of multiple crises. And so we have a crisis of neoliberalism and austerity, which is, I'm always yelling from the rooftops, we live in a society. This crisis of neoliberalism and austerity is turning us, this is a long, long process, decades and decades long process of turning us into atomized individuals where we don't care about other people. We care about our tax breaks. We care about having, detached homes with lawns and, cars instead of public transit. And so what we're missing in this crisis of neoliberalism is a sense of belonging. What parties are offering, right-wing populist parties, that populism is about creating a sense of belonging. And it doesn't have to be grounded in anything that actually helps the people who feel that way. So that's one answer to it. Another answer to it, is to have mutual aid, to take care of each other, to, come together, to be in solidarity with vulnerable people. But with this right-wing populism, even something like a Wexit, it doesn't matter if that will help or hinder the people who support it. It matters that it gives them a sense of belonging. And I see this with the anti-masking stuff too, that they feel like they're part of a social movement, which they are, but is that social movement going to help them? I mean, no, because people are getting COVID, and the more that it spreads, the more variants. You've had lots of people on the show to talk about that. So when you say like, they are working really hard to consolidate their base, it's because that's all that it is. It's not about actually giving policies that are going to help save rural Albertans. And so that's why, it's been really great that you're having all of these people from outside of the urban centers on your show who perhaps have historically been part of conservative bases, who are saying, hey, actually, this isn't helping us. Like, why should we feel this historical sense of belonging that our communities have had with conservative parties if these policies aren't actually helping us? So we need to really see that this is about the word is demos, like creating a sense of like we are a collective of people with political power. But anti-maskers, I don't think they really care necessarily about the masking. They care about being part of something that is against what they consider big government. This has been decades and decades, in the making, but we're really seeing the crisis come to a head with COVID because you cannot be an individual in COVID. There's no this concept of freedom, individual freedom is meaningless. There's no radical individual freedom. We stop at red lights, right? This is just, they're very basic things that we do in order to take care of each other and navigate spaces on roads. So COVID is kind of laying that bare, but I think that hopefully goes some ways to explaining why I think that the actual policies don't matter. And that's why something like Ontario Proud, that is connected to the CPC through Jeff Ballingall. All of these beautiful pictures of, vistas and the natural beauty of Canada interspersed with very violent things against Trudeau, Notley, whatever they perceive as their enemies. And right now, it's all kind of anti-mask, anti-lockdown stuff.
We're talking to Dr. Shama Rangwala, our guest here on Real Talk, and follow up to the Real Talk Roundtable on Friday. I really appreciate you, by the way, first of all, listening to the Roundtable, second of all, responding to it. I wish you would have been there with Harman in real time to challenge him, because I know that he'd be open to it. The guy loves a good debate. Is there anything you haven't said already that you would have said to him in the moment? Because I don't think that he would perceive, nor would I even say that I think he said anything particularly controversial in predicting that he thinks Harman's a proud conservative. He's ran for the Conservatives in past. Provincially, he's involved. He continues to be involved. He's been a volunteer in past. It was, if I understand it correctly, for you, it was just the dichotomy. It was the fact that we were talking about Canadian politics, and then we were talking about the Proud Boys as designated on this terror list. It wasn't necessarily that Harman was drawing a line between the two.
I really prefer not to speak about, what individuals say and think, whom I don't know. And so I can even just speak a little more generally, but I think there are a lot of people who are, first, second generation, third generation immigrants who can say we came here with nothing. And so, individual achievement within capitalism is actually the way that, I think I'm going to thrive. It's very common, and it really works to support parties that are not, that are antisocial in a lot of ways. And I mean that in the sense of, gutting public services that are not kind of about uplifting everybody, but rather about individual success within capitalism.
I'm happy to see that our good friend Dr. Mana Saleh is watching right now. She says it's convenient to denounce racism. She says, yeah, 100%, but sometimes our leaders won't even do that. She references the fact, and I'll read her message. I haven't seen it. I don't know for a fact that Premier Kenney hasn't said anything, but I haven't seen him say anything about the recent attacks on Muslim women last week in the Metro Edmonton region. There have been several over the past couple of months, in particular hijabi women. I saw there your entire posture changed when I read that message from Dr. Saleh. How come?
I mean, it is really disturbing that these incidents have happened. They are the spectacular incidents of violence that, of course, we need to be talking about as a community. I don't care about Jason Kenney denouncing this. I really don't, because it is not something that I need from somebody who I don't think has shown in his actions that he cares about Muslim women or hijabi women. And so, but of course, really feel for the people who have been attacked. And I think that we need to, as a community, again, this is about us as a community having a conversation, not looking to political leaders who can say something just for opportunism. I also really appreciate Dr. Mona. So hi.
Before we go, and I want to thank you for your time. This has nothing to do, or maybe it does actually, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say I don't perceive that this may have anything to do with the subject or at least the jumping off point of our conversation here, but I did see that some of our viewers this morning were celebrating or were excited that you were going to be on the show. They said, hey, one of our keynote speakers from Feminist Friday, which obviously just went a few days ago. And apparently, I guess you delivered a speech there. You inspired some people. Yeah. They were excited to see that you were here. I didn't witness it. I didn't take it in. I don't know what you spoke about, but I think the name is somewhat self-explanatory. But it's a hashtag. What's Feminist Friday all about? And what was your message, generally speaking?
So it's Stacy, who you can find on Twitter. So she's the one who tweeted that. So you can see her handle. And she's been organizing Zooms on Fridays. And so I talked about a kind of critique of how intersectionality is used to kind of do more than it is kind of meant to do, and a critique of representative politics. So like, don't just vote for, a woman because she's a woman, look at the policies, don't support people of color just because they're racialized, but, actually look at what their policies and platforms and stuff are. But yes, Feminist Friday is fun. It's like drinking wine and talking to people on Zoom. So it's a great time.
It's all we do anymore, isn't it? Hey, Doctor, thank you so much for first of all, as mentioned, reaching out. Second of all, for making time for us today. It's a pleasure to have you here on the show for the first time, and I look forward to having you back, Dr. Shama Rangwala, out of the Department of Humanities at York University. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, take care.
You bet. I want to show you an example, Real Talkers, with apologies to those of you that are streaming the audio on Mixlr that are listening to the podcast. I'll read the tweet for you. But Sam, if you see here on my screen, I've got this tweet from Professor Rangwala here. You can follow her on Twitter at FritzelChat. And of course, we link to all of our guests' Twitter handles if they have them. Every morning around 8:15, I send it out from my account at Ryan Jesperson. She says, so here's what we're talking about, for example. Like, here's more information on the right-wing apparatus. If you want to go A to B to C to D and draw the lines, Proud Boys started by Gavin McInnes. McInnes, contributor to Rebel Media. Andrew Scheer's campaign manager. Hamish Marshall co-founded Rebel Media with Ezra Levant. Aaron O'Toole's manager of Canada Proud worked for Ezra Levant at Sun News TV. So these are, so here you go. This is, an example of what we're talking about here, and the degrees of separation and the connections, and they run deep. Now, I'm sure that we're going to hear from some conservatives that say, hey, listen, I'm a conservative because I support their tax policy, and I think that, Aaron O'Toole's heading in the right direction on climate policy or whatever, or these are my draws to the Conservative Party. I'm a pragmatic, progressive person. All this talk about Proud Boys, I'm happy to denounce that. I speak out loudly against people that would seek to divide our community, and I'm not sure that this criticism is fair. And I'd be curious to hear from you. And we'll welcome interviews like that on the show. We want to have these types of conversations, the difficult conversations, the conversations that don't necessarily wind up with everything tied up in a bow and solved. That's not always going to be the case. Our thanks to Professor Shama. I appreciate Dr. Rangwala joining us here. This might be a good time to read an email. I want to make sure that every show we take some time to read the emails. We receive hundreds and hundreds of them every week, and I want you to know how much we appreciate the time that you put into sharing your thoughts with us. talk@ryanjesperson.com is where you can reach us. It goes to Sam and I, so we make sure we get eyes on them. I love this from Christine, who wrote in to say, Ryan, 2 shows in a row where we talk about extremism has me a little worked up. This is last week. Christine says, I convinced my husband to send our 4-year-old to Catholic school in September. Reason number 1 is because our budget just isn't working, and all-day kindergarten is going to help us out a little bit. Reason number 2, I want my kids to have religious literacy. I think that it's something that's needed in the world right now with extreme organizations and political cults emerging fast and furious. Christine says, by the way, I'm an atheist. I grew up in a secular home, but I attended Catholic school. My mom thought that it was the better school in town. I did learn a lot about Catholicism. Christine says, I'll admit I probably got a bit indoctrinated, but I learned about other faiths and why people believe what they do. I was immersed in a culture that I wasn't normally part of, and it helped me understand faith and belief versus fact. Schools went secular when everybody at home was still part of a church, and they prayed at meals, and they went to church or temple or mosque on their holy day. And while there, they learned about faith and hope and what to do when things go bad. The church created a community, and now it seems like the church may be disappearing from society to a certain degree, but people are still looking for answers, and they're still looking for community. And so they're turning to these glitzy mega churches, or to Proud Boys, or to ISIS, or to QAnon. I believe that giving my kids a good sense of religious literacy will protect them from extremist groups. And although sending them to Catholic school is not ideal for our family, I know I can't teach religious literacy on my own. If my sons choose religion as a result, as long as they are accepting of and love all people, I will support them. That from Christine. That's an interesting take. Maybe I'll read this one as well. This doesn't have anything, well, as a matter of fact, it does have to do with politics. This from an individual who does not want their name read on air, which is fine. We get a lot of those. Have you noticed how many we get a lot of emails from people saying, I'm happy to lay it all out here, but please don't use my name on the air.
I think we're learning more and more that there's a lot of people, particularly in this province, that are inside the systems that we're reporting on that are very disenfranchised with them.
Yeah, that's well said, Sam. Oh, by the way, you know what people are calling? Can you take camera 3? Is that 3?
Camera 3 is me.
Yeah.
Hello, it's camera 3.
You know it's been renamed.
Oh.
By, I think it was Trevor or Travis that renamed it. It's the Uncle Sam cam.
Oh, boy.
The Uncle Sam cam. How's your sister doing?
Good. Healthy baby girl named Daphne. Part of our family now.
Daphne.
I've seen a couple photos. Again, Allie's a very notoriously private person, so
you've warned
nothing
us
I can share right now.
We're not going to see a photo on Real Talk.
We're not going to see a photo on Real Talk yet, but yes, I'm a very proud uncle of little Daphne Spivak.
Little Daphne. That's wonderful. Congratulations. So we'll say that this is from Lauren. She doesn't want her real name read on air, which is fine. Lauren says, as a person born and raised in Ontario, who's now lived in Alberta for 30 plus years, raising my family here, I take great exception to Art Price. You remember Art Price, the former CEO of Husky Energy? It's actually one of our most watched interviews in the history of the show. Art Price saying that the former CEO of Husky Energy saying the cancellation of Keystone XL is not a big deal and don't worry about it. And he explains why. He talks about market capacity, and he said it in a very measured and kind of, when he spells it out. You can check it even on my Twitter, on my profile. We posted like a 2-minute clip, just a little highlight of the interview. I think 65,000 people have watched him say, you think if the United States actually thought that it was going to experience an energy shortage, that they wouldn't figure out a pipeline? He's like, the market's not there. He says that Alberta should not be, I'm paraphrasing, Alberta should not seek to, balance its books by expanding production capacity. He says the industry has moved on and the government should too. It was quite an interview. But he did start talking about subsidies. Out of the gates, the interview, in my mind, it started a little slow. And I didn't sort of know exactly where it was going to go. But he talked about subsidies, and he said, the oil industry hasn't really received a lot of subsidies. And I kind of went, well, I'm not so sure about that. And then you can watch the interview in its entirety if you like. But it prompted Lauren to say I wasn't a big fan, and I took exception of Art Price's characterization of subsidies and his divisive rhetoric. It's an insult to my entire family and all of my friends in Central Canada. Didn't Central Canada help Alberta build its oil and gas infrastructure? Lauren says, that's what I learned in public school in the 1970s. Don't people remember when Petro-Canada was a crown corporation? Yeah, they do. Did I say this on the show or off the air, that what my grandpa Rudy, who was a proud engineer for Chevron, taught me what Petro-Canada stood for? Did I think I must have.
That must have been off air.
You know what? I think that was in a podcast I just recorded. That's going to be coming out. Not my podcast. I was a guest. I'll tell you about it when they're ready to talk about it. My grandpa taught me when I was a kid that Petro-Canada stands for Pierre Elliott Trudeau rips off Canada. That's what Petro-Canada started. So people do remember, Lauren. They do remember that it was a crown corporation in Alberta. Let me get back to the email. She says, I did not mind contributing to it through my taxes because it was in the national interest. Is there no such thing anymore? Does Mr. Price really believe that his fellow citizens work less hard or are somehow taking advantage of him? Lauren says, what a mean-spirited view of the country. I call bullshit. Lauren says, perhaps you could get a Canadian historian on the show to explain how different parts of the country have supported one another to succeed over the more than a century that we've been a country. Isn't that the point of Confederation? That's a fascinating premise, isn't it, for a feature? She says, on an unrelated note, and I wanted to read this part on the air, as a person of modest means, I wanted to donate $5 a month on your show's Patreon. However, it was $5 US, and my bank wants to determine the exchange rate, and I don't want to give the bank any more of my money. So I want to figure out if there's another way to do it. Well, Lauren, I'm excited to tell you that now, if you go onto our Patreon, you can link to it at ryanjesperson.com. You can select Canadian currency. And so you should be able to make that change. We insured it. We pulled the levers as best we could. So you should be able to direct it to $5 Canadian. And thank you to everybody that supports this show, that has joined us on this journey. You're allowing us to build our team. And as we make our way into now February and into March and April of 2021, we're going to have some exciting announcements to share with you. We've also got a Patreon benefit that's going to be set for announcement in the next couple of weeks, and we're really excited about that. So more and more reasons for you to continue to support the show. Wanted to remind you right now, before we get to our next guests, that this is a perfect time. I know it doesn't feel this way. I know you're worried about your pipes freezing right now. I know you're worried about, is your vehicle even going to start? I know you're learning about polar vortexes, unless you're watching in from Costa Rica or New Zealand or Vancouver. Yeah. But it's a great time of year, no matter where you are, to start thinking about reinventing your outdoor space. And the team at Eden Landscaping right now wants to let you know that they're experts in incorporating urban agriculture. They're also experts in things like swim spas and hot tubs and saunas, built-in barbecues, smokers, outdoor pizza ovens. What about a gazebo when you're allowed to have friends over to sit under and maybe enjoy some wine? What about a 4-season plan? Is this something that you've considered before? It's what Eden Landscaping does, and it's what they do well, and they're ready to take your call and start that planning process. They've been doing this for more than 20 years, and it's their passion. You can find Eden Landscaping under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. They can get them started. They can take a look at your property by Google Earth. They can meet you over Zoom, and they can get the ball rolling on reinventing your space. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. This next subject, I don't know a ton about it. As a matter of fact, all I know is that healthcare professionals across the province are starting to sound the alarm in the context of harm reduction. There's a petition that's out. There's a GoFundMe that's going on right now, and we thought that this is something that Real Talkers need to have on their radar. So it's a real pleasure to welcome to the program Avnish Nanda, a lawyer that practices out of Edmonton, as well as Dr. Jennifer Jackson, who's a registered nurse and a professor in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. To the both of you, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.
Doctor, we've had the type of show where we have been all over the place. We're talking about markets. We're talking about the mechanisms of politics. We've been talking about a new governor general. We're talking about 911 response, and the common theme through our live comments on our hashtag, on our live chat on YouTube, people are saying, gosh, it can be tough to stay on top of everything. It can be tough to stay in the know when it comes to issues that matter. This is a perfect example, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the problems that we are seeing right now, we want to make people aware of them because they make a significant difference for Albertans. So we're here to speak with you today about the injectable opioid agonist treatment program in Alberta, which is known as iOAT. And the purpose of this program is to provide intensive care type of treatment for people with opioid use disorder or people with opioid addiction. And so this treatment is life-saving. I have done research on this treatment, some of which has been released today. We know that it is a clinical practice that works, and the Alberta government wants to cut the program. And I appreciate that there are a lot of difficult things happening for Albertans right now, but we need to care about this because iOAT creates positive benefits that ripple across the whole healthcare system. And so if we start getting rid of these kinds of programs, we're going to see knock-on effect that will affect every one of us.
Okay, so what's your speculation around why the provincial government wants to cancel this? Do you think it's a budget cut? Do you think it's an ideologically prompted move? What's your opinion?
When I look across the different policies that the Alberta government is applying to community treatment for opioid addiction, there is a common thread. So we see that supervised consumption sites have been closed, particularly in Lethbridge, even though that site was the highest per capita use in North America, second in the world. We see that this is a community treatment facility that is also at risk of being closed. In contrast, the Alberta government wants to shift people who are receiving treatment for addiction, which is a chronic illness, to services where people stay for 30 days and they have a residential experience. However, we know that those are more expensive. The cheapest care we can provide to anyone for any issue is in the community. So budget doesn't fit. When we look at clinical outcomes, we know that the clinical outcomes we can get in the community are better than if we have to wait to address something in the hospital. So that doesn't fit. So the thing I'm left with is that this is ideological and is not based in science.
So Avnish, as a lawyer, how do you become involved in this? How did this first wind up on your radar?
Ryan, can you hear me well?
I can hear you great. You bet.
Great. So this past summer, a group of patients and healthcare professionals who work in this clinic approached me talking about what would happen to them, what would happen to the patients if this service was suspended. And Ryan, I went through a deep dive of speaking with patients across Edmonton and Calgary, listening to experts in Alberta, British Columbia, other locations to try to understand how critical iOAT is. And to be clear, iOAT is the only form of medical treatment for folks living with the most severe form of opioid use disorder. These are the folks who are most likely to die of an opioid overdose death, which in this province happens 3 times a day. 3 Albertans a day die of an opioid use disorder, of an opioid overdose death. And what I learned was that without continued access to iOAT, these patients, these people who look like you and me, who may be related to us, are likely going to die or experience severe health impacts. And that's not a hyperbolic statement. That's true. At least one patient has died since the announced closure of iOAT. More will die. And, as someone like yourself who, cares about other Albertans, particularly those who are living with this condition, there was an impetus on people in the community as well as myself to figure out a way to stop this closure so that these Albertans can continue to access this life-saving and life-sustaining medical treatment.
So don't you have you're in court in 2 days, aren't you, Avnish? You're in court in a couple of days here advocating on behalf of these patients who are actually suing the government. Am I characterizing that correctly?
Yes, you're right. We're in court trying to get the government to allow continued access to iOAT while our constitutional challenge against the government's cut is being decided. So it's a big day on Wednesday because after this month, next month, the Alberta government intends to shut down this treatment. And if that happens, you have 100 Albertans, maybe more, who will be without the medical treatment they need to live. And, my clients, a lot of them are my age, a lot of them come from similar backgrounds. And I just can't begin to describe to you the fear and terror in their eyes. These are folks who, who lived on the streets for much of their lives, who experienced all forms of harm and violence that comes with living on the streets with an opioid use disorder, sexual violence if you are a woman or a girl, and managed to escape all that through iOAT, who provided them not only effective medical treatment, but sexual health supports, housing, a range of other things. And now that's going to be taken away from them, and they're going to be back in the position that they were before with the real likelihood of dying.
Doctor, I guarantee you, people are going to be watching right now, and I know that both of you are saying, sort of qualifying, saying, at risk of being hyperbolic here, but when it comes down to the fact that you can make the assertion that this is a decision that will cost people their lives, what sort of evidence do you look to? I mean, I know that you and your colleagues have recently commissioned a report on this. Is that somewhat unusual on its own, by the way, for you to commission your own report, or is that par for the course?
So for our part, we did our own research here at the University of Calgary. And so I can speak to that. But in terms of thinking about other examples, we have seen there's been numerous clinical trials in this area. That's the same type of research procedure that is being applied to the COVID vaccine. And we have seen that whenever iOAT is withdrawn, between 13 and 20% of the people who had been using iOAT have died within a year. So it's not hyperbole. This would be equivalent to saying, okay, we are going to give you a dialysis machine. You go home, figure it out yourself. Or here's a bag of chemo. You go home and you can figure it out yourself. Like, if we were to look at it through that lens, saying that to other Albertans would be absolutely unthinkable. We would never consider treating someone with cancer or with renal failure like that. And part of my concern is that if the government is allowed to cut a program that is based on science and we know is working, and we have strong indicators that it is saving the province money across a number of fronts, if the government can decide that no, they don't want to have this service, what's to stop them from removing other health services due to stigma? So this is very concerning for these patients, absolutely, but also the potential ripple effects for other Albertans. The other thing that we know is that community health services keep people out of emergency departments. So whether it be people who go to the emergency department for an overdose and to get treatment for an overdose, or other reasons, when we have programs like iOAT, we prevent that. And so that means that if grandpa is out shoveling the snow, hopefully staying warm on a day like today, but if grandpa's out shoveling the snow, has a slip on the ice, and needs to go to the emergency department, it means that grandpa will be able to get faster care because there will not be people who need overdose treatments in that emergency department. So absolutely, this is life-sustaining treatment for the people who use iOAT. This also has potential consequences for anybody in Alberta who could potentially use an emergency department.
I mean, Doctor, you paint that, you do a good job of creating a scenario that will. I'm trying to not come across to be too cynical. It's why I'm a little slow into the question or into my response, because what you're doing is true. You're explaining to people that, listen, when it comes to wait times, when it comes to ER access, your grandpa that bruised his tailbone or broke his leg is going to be able to get into the ER more quickly because there won't be somebody there that's recovering from an overdose. And what you're doing, obviously, is helping us as a society. I don't mean the words I'm about to say, but generally speaking, in society, there are many people that don't care about the person that's experiencing the overdose. That doesn't resonate with them. If you were to say someone's fighting for their life in intensive care right now, or they're fighting for their life in the ER due to an overdose, people start to care when you say your grandpa might be laying in the snow and might have to wait for the broken leg, right? It's the same sort of a thing where, and Avnish, I want to ask you, about your argument in court and what it would look like. We can even say, and advocates for harm reduction have been saying loudly for many years that the fiscal case is there. It costs less to run a supervised consumption service and to fund health measures for people and to provide safe supply and clean needles and health resources. And it's going to cost us less than dispatching ambulances to back alleys where a human being is dying behind a dumpster with a needle in their arm. And even still, it doesn't seem to resonate with some people. Even the fiscal argument, which to me is important, but seems kind of cold if we have to be talking dollars and cents. But even then, it doesn't resonate. I'd like both of you to respond to this. Avnish, maybe first, because I would imagine that to a certain degree, you're going to try to be influencing a judge's perspective in a couple of days. How are you going to do it?
For sure, Ryan. And the good thing is that iOAT is well studied in Canada. In fact, as part of our evidence on Wednesday, we've found a healthcare economist who specializes or has researched the health savings and societal benefits from a fiscal perspective or economic perspective of iOAT therapy. And he's found in British Columbia, and he says it applies likely to Alberta, that there are net savings on a society-wide level with iOAT because folks who are seeking this treatment, who are most likely to require intensive healthcare resources to the emergency room and other services if they're not on iOAT, from a criminal justice perspective as well, they're less likely to be involved in criminal activity to sustain their opioid use. That we're actually talking about significant cost savings with iOAT relative to not having it. But more than that, I take your point, Ryan, that for some people it's hard to wrap their head around or perhaps even empathize with someone who they hear about experiencing opioid use disorder or an overdose death. But I want people to know that the population of folks who live with opioid use disorder in Alberta, even those who have the most severe form of this condition, who are accessing iOAT right now, if people were able to see them face to face, talk to them, they would realize that there's a lot more similarities than differences. We're talking about people who come from all walks of life, all backgrounds, who get on this track with opioid use disorder, from a sports injury, let's say. One of my patients is a bit younger than me, in Calgary, rich family. Dad was a executive of an oil company. When he got injured in football, he was given opioids, and it's been this very terrible journey since. Just this descent, because the time he was prescribed opioids, there was no real limits on how much was given. There was no awareness that there is now, and frankly, his life is ruined. He tells me now that he wished he had never had taken those opioids.
Yeah. I've got a friend who after a significant injury, refused to take his prescribed painkillers because I think he knows his personality, and I think he knew what might happen, and instead he chose to endure horrific pain as opposed to taking the meds. But Avnish, and you and I know that you'll know I'm saying this in the right spirit. I am not criticizing you. I've got a lot of love for you. You know this. But you and I have both acknowledged in past conversations, it's crappy that we even have to do this. That we even, and I've done it on the air multiple times, saying, hey, like, there are opioid overdoses in the suburbs. Like, if I can, I maybe never said it this obviously, but rich blonde girls in St. Albert can overdose, everybody. Like CEOs can overdose. Wealthy people in religious circles can develop addictions. Like, Jennifer, it's brutal that we have to, because what are we saying here? What are we saying? What we're really saying is it's not just street people. It's not just Indigenous people. It's not, right? That's what we're saying without saying it. And it's brutal that we have to communicate this way to try to glean public support. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers here. And I'm retweeting Avnish and yourself and the study that you've put out, the fact that it's expected that up to 20% of existing clients could die because of the program being canceled. Those are people. Can you imagine if we said 20% of people might die with the cancellation of any other program? You think that the public would stand for it for even 1 second?
Not a chance. And I think that's why it's important we have these conversations. And you know what? Even if it was only street people, so to speak, who were experiencing opioid use disorder, they still deserve care. Everyone deserves care. And my premise as a registered nurse is that I don't judge people, I support them, and I provide care for them. And so I think that it's really hard because I honestly don't know how to tell people you need to care about others. I can understand that there are people who say, look, I don't want anybody to be harmed, but things are a little bit lean right now, and I am worried about the bottom line. I want to see that, I'm able to feed my family, and I can't stand my taxes going up a whole lot right now. So I think that's part of why we try to show these different angles on these issues, because all of those angles are there. It's supportive for Albertans who are experiencing a hard time. It improves clinical care outcomes. It saves money. If you look at it from a libertarian perspective, we can say that, this provides people with lots of options for their care. If we close iOAT, there's going to be fewer choices and a restriction on their freedoms. If you're socially conservative and, can't stand the idea of addiction, well, but for the grace of God, there go I. I think every faith has some type of language along those lines. And you know what? Even if somebody doesn't buy into all of that, I would say we have a good program in place already, and the government has other priorities, and leave well enough alone.
Yeah, I mean, I just love what you just did. I absolutely love that you're saying if you're a libertarian perspective, this, if you're socially conservative, this. You can even, I don't mean to sort of pigeonhole this to those of the Christian faith, but I think we know that if Jesus was walking the earth in 2021, he'd be volunteering at soup kitchens. He'd be hanging out with the addicted and the homeless and sex trade workers like he did 2,000 years ago. I don't need to start getting into the theology of this, but there are many arguments. Jesus would be flipping tables right now if he was around the Alberta legislature, seeing how we're managing some of these files. Doctor, the pandemic, I've seen and participated in some town halls where the opioid crisis has been described as the other epidemic. Have you seen either data, have you seen actually research, scientific data that would lead you to believe, or anecdotal evidence that the opioid crisis has been made worse, that the challenges have been exacerbated as a result of COVID-19?
Yes, and this is challenging because the government of Alberta has not released new data about opioid use in Alberta since June of 2020. That's the last information we have. So those reports used to be released quarterly since about 2016 to provide updated information for healthcare professionals. And now we stalled. We haven't heard anything since June of 2020. Given the consequences of opioid use disorder for Albertans, I think that is really unacceptable that the data is being restricted in the first place. Based on that information we did have at that time, 2.5 more people had died from opioid use disorder in Alberta than COVID. And so if that trend has held, it is a reasonable projection that more people have died in Alberta related to opioids than COVID today.
But just to be clear, so you're saying 2.5 times more people, there have been 2.5 times more fatalities due to the opioid crisis as opposed to COVID-19 in Alberta?
Yes. At the time the data was released, the rates were 1 COVID death per day and 2.5 opioid deaths per day.
And is that a break from the norm with regards to withholding that data, withholding that information? How unusual is that, and what do you think is prompting that?
I can't mind read, but I know that previously the province was able to put out those reports quarterly. So I'm not sure if that infrastructure was already available. I'm not sure why that information can't be made publicly available at this time. And given that, as you say, we have what some people refer to as a syndemic, a synergistic pandemic of both opioid use disorder and COVID-19, this is critical information. And, we should be having regular briefings on this, just as we do with COVID-19. And it also, unfortunately, makes logical sense because I think if people reflect, I certainly wouldn't want to speak for everyone, but I know maybe there's been a couple extra beers when COVID-19 has been really stressful, maybe an extra glass of wine at the end of the day because it's just a little bit hard to cope right now. And that's reasonable for everyone. So if we look at that and then think, okay, that's maybe the case for us, for people that are already systematically excluded from our society, how much harder is this to deal with?
Yeah.
And in fact, the iOAT program has been a leader in Alberta in ensuring that their services have converted to mobile options, and they have transformed to make sure that people can still get care. And I think, it calls on all of our humanity to reflect on how challenging things are and to look and say, it makes sense, unfortunately, that if people are struggling, that there are higher risks.
That systematic exclusion that you touched on is so huge. My brother works in harm reduction in Vancouver, and I've talked to him about that, about how shame is such a huge part of this, and there's a real self-awareness on behalf of a lot of people who use drugs. And so the inclination to exclude themselves from social interaction is so massive. And that's why he'll advocate so strongly for things like supervised consumption services, because like you've talked about, it's a community hub. It creates a connection that can lead to people accessing things like healthcare that can allow them in time to really make dramatic improvements in their overall health and well-being. Avnish, I want to draw people's attention to the fact that there's the GoFundMe out there. You're doing all right on this, by the way. You've got $60,000 set as your goal here, and you've raised closing in on $24,000 here. If I know anything about Real Talkers, you'll probably see that bump up a little bit as you're asking people to help stop the Premier from shutting down iOAT. What do people need to know? We typically like to end an interview with a call to action. The last thing I want is for a viewer to say, well, what the hell am I supposed to do about this? So what are they supposed to do about this, Avnish?
Sure. That looks like a lot of money, but the Alberta government is actually seeking costs against these iOAT patients if they win. So
what?
$20,000. Yeah, they're trying to get their legal costs against these people who are in very tough financial and life situations. So the first $20,000 is towards potentially covering in a cost award that would have to be paid to the government of Alberta. So it's really not a lot. But in terms of call to action, I would just implore your listeners and your viewers to go and contact their MLAs, write letters, pick up the phone, because there's no good reason for the government of Alberta to do this. Even from a funding perspective, it's my understanding that the federal government has committed funds towards this program. This is just, this is ideological, and it's just really regrettable that so many Albertans will die because of this, and it's entirely preventable.
Do you, I wish that I could give the viewer credit. I don't remember who it was, but I saw somebody earlier this morning. We were talking about something completely different, by the way. We were talking to mayors and fire chiefs about 911 dispatch being centralized, and the fact that they're saying in that case some people are going to die because of this, another policy change. And one of our viewers said, calling and emailing, and I agree with the spirit of what they're saying. I don't totally agree, and maybe they don't totally mean it, but they said, calling and emailing isn't going to do anything because their inboxes are already so jammed with people that are so upset about so many things, and it's really not making a dent. The viewer said, what we need to do is continue to pursue and go after this government in court. That's what you're doing. Do you agree to a certain extent that, for a government that's not consulting, not listening, emails only go so far? I wouldn't even be surprised if half these MLAs have their out of office turned on and have done so for the last number of months.
100%. I've been involved with a couple of lawsuits now where even in response to the lawsuit, the government backed down to some extent. Even in iOAT, they've made some concessions that it doesn't go all the way, but it shows that courts work and they're serving their purpose.
To the two of you, I'm grateful that you've made the time to talk to us. Dr. Jackson, thank you so much for putting this on our radar. I'll admit it's something I've been trying to stay on top of, but in this news cycle, it's such a challenge. Yet your advocacy has continued, as has yours, Avnish, and we appreciate both of you making yourselves available on the show today. I want to let Real Talkers know that I've retweeted some information that the two of you are putting out for those that want to get involved, get engaged, find the link to the GoFundMe, etc. Thanks for talking to us this morning.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you very much.
That's Dr. Jennifer Jackson, PhD and a professor, a registered nurse as well, out of the University of Calgary, and Avnish Nanda, who practices law here out of Edmonton. He'll be in court on Wednesday on behalf of these iOAT patients. The chat has been busy. Brenna, I noticed Brenna's comments throughout have been really solid. I'll just read one here, but she says, treating addiction like a health issue, as it is, helps people to recover and survive. Why do we throw away people who struggle with addiction? We need everybody to help us face the challenges ahead. Lynn says a lot of people believe that drug addiction is a choice, not an illness, which is totally true. It's totally true that people believe that. Alice says, this government consults law enforcement and community members with concerns about crime, talking about supervised consumption, consulted no providers, no mental health professionals, no clients. Is it Chaim? Am I pronouncing that correctly? It's either Chaim or Chaim. Says we should be going after some of the doctors here and go after Big Pharma to pay for these sites, to pay for these clinics. Wouldn't be surprised to see more legal action. I mean, Big Pharma has been in the crosshairs for quite some time. Yeah, I mean, here's Brenna again. Portugal turned around. Portugal's a fascinating study. Turned around a huge problem with heroin use and narcotics by decriminalizing and offering methadone and other therapies to as many people as they could, and it worked. It's seen as a global example. It is. How about this from Hope? This is a heartbreaker. I noticed that Hope had said earlier this morning that she was really looking forward to this conversation. She says, my brother died by suicide as a drug user. Hope, I'm so sorry to hear that for your family's loss. Hope says, I wound up on opioids due to a back surgery, and they are horribly addicting. I was able to transition to a different pain med, but I was certainly dependent. That from Hope. I mean, there's firsthand testimony on this. Many of you are saying you need to follow the money on this. Cindy says, private treatment centers, right? Some of you are pointing out that Jason Kenney's brother is involved in a treatment center. You can read about him. You can Google him. I don't know if this government's doing this all because Jason Kenney's brother has a center, but I will say there is absolutely and without a doubt an ideological influence to this, right? The idea, for some people, the idea of a drug user, right, attending some sort of a facility that's paid for with public funds, getting access to a needle. And you'll see, here's the thing, if we have people that are watching right now that are diabetics, this is not a shot at you, but I've heard people write in and say, how on earth are these drug users getting clean needles when I, as a diabetic, have to pay for my needles? And I've always sat there and said, you know what? Maybe we should pay for, I don't know much about that. I should learn more about that. And maybe we as a society should pay for your needles. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't provide clean needles for everybody else, right? Because the diabetics aren't getting their needles. These people who use drugs don't get needles. And so we have, unmitigated spread of HIV. We have other diseases being spread. It's completely unhealthy. It's not a safe practice. It's preventable. Relatively speaking, it's a manageable cost. There are all these reasons. The idea of somebody showing up to tap into a safe supply. In other words, you'll hear the politicians that would oppose this call it, free drugs, right? Drugs that you paid for out of your taxes. It's just completely unpalatable. The idea that someone could come in, someone that's probably not even working, right? Somebody that doesn't even have a job is going to be able to show up and get free drugs that I paid for and a free needle and get high. And then if they believe all the noise from people that don't deal in facts, the people that peddle in fear, these people who use drugs, they'll use other words for them, will leave the facility all high, and then they're going to what? They're going to start going through your backyard, right? They're going to start casing out your house, trying to break into your house, right? It's ideological division, and it's unfortunate because lives are at stake. I feel like I'm picking up, Sam, if I'm reading your body language, that you may have an opinion on this, but I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't.
I think on your last comment there, my opinion is I don't know if I can eye roll any harder.
Yeah, your whole posture changed.
No, the idea that okay, fine, you want to go down that rabbit hole of I'm paying for your free drugs, which you're not. You're going to pay for them to be incarcerated. You're going to pay for them to be in an emergency room. You're going to pay for the social supports that are going to pick them up. And this jobless drug user that you like to malign so much might actually be able to get a drug if they had access to a safe, or might actually be able to get a job if they had access to a safe consumption site, might actually be able to get access to the supports that lead. Becoming clean is such a hard job.
Oh, it's a
and when your whole life scenario doesn't have stable housing, doesn't have stable supports, doesn't have the stuff that we privileged people take for granted, and then, you know, whine about when our taxes are going towards supporting these drug users. Fuck all you guys.
Oh, gee, whoa, okay.
There you go. That's my take. Quit whining. It saves money, and more importantly, it saves lives.
Okay, Sam Brooks. That was a first. I love it. You got a little passion there. I love it.
I choose my spots carefully.
Yeah, you do pick your spots. Say what you mean what you say. People that tuned in for 2 hours and 13 minutes got to hear you drop, I think, your first F-bomb in the history of Real Talk. Thanks for the candor. Appreciate it. You can let us know what you make of this. This is a conversation where I feel like, you know, we talk about these calls to action. We want to give you something to think about or walk with through the day, and I feel like it's a long list. You've got a long list of assignments today, Real Talkers, and as we continue to endeavor to talk about things that matter and make positive impacts in our community. Travis says this government sees drug addiction as a moral failing, not a health issue, so they don't believe they need to treat it as such. Brenna Back says, I feel sick when I hear arguments that homeless people or people that are addicted don't contribute. You know, they don't contribute to taxes or to labor participation, thus they don't deserve treatment. Is being a worker the only doorway to compassion? Yeah, this is just, this live chat is something else, by the way. I so appreciate all of you that take the time to, the chat came alive with your comments, Sam. Everybody's cheering for you here. So, we're just gonna leave this with you. I'm sort of feeling right now like, you know, you'd love to be able to bring this to some sort of resolution, but hey, sometimes this show is the biggest thing that we can do is just put stuff on our radar and make sure that it's not being ignored, and we'll continue to do that. And we do that in part by having you tell us what matters to you most. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that. You can send us an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Sometimes the most important emails that we receive are from people that are saying, I haven't heard one word of this on the show. Are you guys even aware of this? And we go, wow, how has that been flying under the radar? That's how we make a lot of our editorial decisions. Another way that you can have a say on our show is by taking part and participating in our question of the week. And it's presented by Y Station. Every Monday, we roll out a new question of the week. And if you check out ryanjesperson.com, you'll see our question of the week this week. Lately, we've been seeing some upheaval and even, dare we say, shenanigans in the financial markets. It got us thinking, what are your habits? How do you work with money? How do you invest, and who do you trust? This week's Real Talk, Get Real question of the week is all about the Benjamins and what you think is happening in our financial markets right now. And we thank you in advance for participating there. We'd also like to say a huge thank you to the team at Alta Moving and Storage. You know, this is your local solution to cutting the stress out of the equation of moving. Polling shows that moving is identified by most people as a top 3 most stressful event. It's right up there with things like public speaking, but it doesn't have to be that way. The team at Alta Moving and Storage have perfected the art of these pod-style containers. They drop them off at your house. They come up with a plan with you. When do you need it? How long do you need it? What are you using it for? Do you need extra labor? They can provide that too. And they want to make sure that your moving process, your experience is a positive one. So if you're going to require some short-term storage, if you're going to put some things away in long-term secure storage, that's their business too. You can find them online at Alta Moving and Storage. You can check out altastorage.ca or, of course, follow the link at ryanjesperson.com. We're also very proud to be partnering up with the team at Kuby Energy. You know, Monday's a very special day for our partnership with the team at Kuby because they help us get our week started off right, especially on a show like this where we've been talking about some heavy stuff. So we're going to get into that in just a second, but I do want to remind you, we got a couple of emails from Real Talkers over the weekend saying we've connected with Kuby and we're planning our install for the spring. Whether you're in BC or Alberta, they've got Western Canada covered with 2 head offices. They're Tesla certified, and all of their installers are journeyman electricians, so you know the job's done right. Plus, they handle all the paperwork. They take the hassle out of it. The solar install at Kuby Energy. Of course, Kuby Energy each and every Monday helps us start our week with a smile as they present Positive Reflections. These are things that Sam and I noticed through last week. These are submissions, videos, and photos that you sent us, and we want to hear your stories too. I want to tell the story of the person that turned your day around, that put a smile on your face, that maybe paid forward an act of random kindness. You can submit them to talk@ryanjesperson.com. This first one made me smile. The tweet from Dan Levy, a 9-time Emmy winner who did an amazing job just this last Saturday, a couple nights ago on Saturday Night Live, retweeting his mom, Deb, who tweeted, "This goes out to the bully punks at Camp WTF who made life miserable for a certain cabin mate back in the summer of '96 just because he was different. Well, after all these years, I have just 7 words to say to you. Live from New York, it's Saturday night." I love that. A mom's pride there. That's Danny Levy's mom. How about this one from Sarah Mack? Of course, in parts of Canada right now, frigid temperatures, and it has some of you experimenting with science. Sarah sent us this video in frigid cold, trying science on for size. Check this out. This is so very cool. Sarah knew Real Talkers would love to see this. Yeah! Woo! How's that? I know for everybody listening on the podcast, you're going to have to check out our YouTube channel if you want to see what Sarah did with boiling water in the freezing cold. How about this from Sheets, who knew it would make our day to see their 4-legged family member tuned in for the Real Talk Roundtable. We love it, knowing that humans and animals are digging up and putting out what we're putting out. We love that and love that photo from Sheets. Thanks so much. This was from Gordon. Gordon, a friend of ours in Lesser Slave Lake, who's invited us to do a remote show from his ice fishing hut. Sounds pretty good to me.
Beautiful.
Sam, what do you think?
Serene.
You think we could maybe hop on a couple snowmobiles, and as long as we can
I'd
get
be down.
as long as we can get LTE signals, we should be able to do a show from Gordon's fishing hut, don't you
I'd say
think?
so.
That is just a stunning
I see a satellite
sky.
dish mounted on it.
Yeah,
so
I
we'll
noticed.
tap into something there.
Tap into satellite. And what do we do if we get a bite on the line, though? We'll have to just, well, everybody can wait.
It's real talk.
Everybody
we hook the fish in and we grill it
well,
on
then,
air.
Then it's real talk. Like,
yeah.
Sorry, I can't help myself.
That's great. No, that's great.
Mayor Alana Nachu. I love this. She's a friend of the show. She's been on Real Talk before. And here's Mayor capturing from her beautiful, I mean, look at that. Sturgeon County, the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis. Mayor with either a steady hand or a tripod. I don't know what it is, but nailing a couple beautiful shots, Your Worship. Thank you for sharing those with us. Bunsen and Beaker, we're back at it. Our favorite science dogs out of Red Deer, Alberta. Check this out over the weekend. Love this from Mr. Zed, who's, their human companion. He's been on the show before too, but we know the dogs are the stars. Look at this capture. Isn't this stunning? If you're listening on the podcast, check out the YouTube. But this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Sam? I wonder how you make this happen. You probably have to prop up the fork, let the noodles fall before they freeze, eh?
Beaker's expression is so perfect in this. It's just, and then there's Bunsen.
And such a good dog, leaving the noodles alone. Perfect. And why don't we leave with a beautiful capture? That is so neat. A beautiful capture from our pal Chris Sturwold, who plays drums on the title track of Real Talk's tunes. Well, it turns out he's got a pretty beautiful eye as well. Furnace exhaust art. And beautifully
for a beer
done.
in my backyard on Saturday.
Oh, Chris did.
Yeah,
okay, well, there you go. Chris Sturwold, Furnace Exhaust Art. Of course, you can send us your material to be considered for positive reflections by sending an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Make it a great Monday. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow at 8:30 Mountain Time.